Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's such an honour to be here. It's such an honour to be here. I just want to thank the Te Matakana board for inviting us to the Whānau Ora Hui 2018. It is a privilege to come along and share some of our ideas with you, or our challenges, and particularly where we're at in New South Wales at the moment. I guess it's more challenges than the ideas that are being picked up or the solutions that we have for our communities and our families. Before I go further, I do want to introduce the others that are with me from AbSec and from New South Wales, Australia. So we have Patrice Manton, who's the Deputy Chairperson of AbSec and also CEO of Mullumbimba, which is an Aboriginal organisation in the child and family space in the Newcastle area, Hunter area of New South Wales. We have Suzanne Naden, who's the Treasurer of AbSec and also CEO of Bungaree on the central coast of New South Wales, delivering in the family support space as well as housing, ageing and disability. I'm sure I forgot something. And Paul Gray and Dana Hogg, don't see where Dana is, but who are my two executive leaders, and we'll talk a little bit more about what their role is over the next little bit. So again, thank you. So about AbSec, we're a not-for-profit organisation, Aboriginal owned and run. We're non-government, and we're considered the peak body for Aboriginal children and families in New South Wales, representing our Aboriginal organisations and our Aboriginal communities to government. Predominantly the New South Wales government level, as in Australia, child protection is a state or territory-based jurisdiction forming under each state and territory government. So we work with the New South Wales government to propose policies and ways forward about how we work with our Aboriginal children first, but taking a child and family-centric approach. And at a national level, we work with our counterpart in Queensland, as well as through our national body, SNAKE, to try and influence the national agenda of how we support Aboriginal children and families across the country. Sadly, within that, it's New South Wales and Queensland as having the only two representative state bodies for Aboriginal children and families. Every other state and territory in Australia has that absent. So I have a little movie for you, a little clip, just about, yeah.
AbSec's important to Aboriginal communities. We're the peak body in New South Wales for out-of-home care, child protection, early intervention. We provide policy support for government agencies to better outcomes for our Aboriginal children, families and communities.
What we want to see is our Aboriginal kids thriving, safe, in their community, involved with their family, and a strong path for their future.
I've always said that I'll work in the area where I think I can make the biggest difference for children and families, and that's why I work at AbSec.
The reason why I'm a youth ambassador for AbSec is because I went through the foster care system. I'm Aboriginal, and I use my experiences to help put in policies and recommendations to government to change the system and change the negative experiences that I've had and make sure that the kids in care have a positive outcomes in their lives.
I'm a youth ambassador with AbSec because I love to help children. I want to be able to help Aboriginal children in and out of home care. Culture means family to me. It's very important that we find family and reunite.
It gives me a chance to have a voice for young people in out-of-home care and in the child protection system, able to speak on their behalf and hopefully make it a better system for them.
We want to see our Aboriginal kids within their family supported by Aboriginal organisations across New South Wales.
Supporting our kids.
Support our culture.
Support AbSec.
Support AbSec.
Now look, we came up with this little clip to just in a way, just describe us and what we're about and how we keep culture at the centre of everything that we do as an Aboriginal peak organisation that don't provide services to families directly, but we represent our organisations out there that are delivering for our families and help shape that kind of change. Our vision is the focus of our work every day, and we try and build this into everything that we do and our solutions that we put forward. So we want to see all Aboriginal children and young people to be looked after in safe, thriving Aboriginal families and communities. And we want them to be raised strong in spirit and identity, with every opportunity for lifelong well-being and connection to culture, surrounded by holistic supports in our communities. And there are a few different elements that come together to feed into this vision for us. It requires Aboriginal communities to be supported through local organisations that are community-owned and community-controlled. We want to see adequate resourcing of our Aboriginal communities through their own community-controlled organisations and governance structures, and to deliver holistic and culturally tailored programs aimed at our families and communities and promoting those conditions for our children to thrive. And to achieve this vision, we know we have to constantly influence and advocate governments, constantly demonstrate strengths of our communities, more so than non-Aboriginal counterparts, in order for government to move further towards our solutions. And they're the sets of values and principles that really are our core as an organisation. And really as an organisation for close to 20 years since we've been operating, we try to embed within everything that we do. But what I want to do today is talk a little about the history, the context of where we're coming from in terms of child protection out-of-home care policy, as well as some of the ideas that we've developed to start to enable government in New South Wales to start to realise that we do have the solutions and that we can talk about our business and ask of government to invest in us as a way forward to supporting our families and communities. So as a starting point, Aboriginal kids in out-of-home care in New South Wales. So they represent 38% of all children in out-of-home care in New South Wales, and that roughly equates to more than 7,000 Aboriginal children removed from their families and placed in foster care situations or in kinship groups. For us, we can see that the trend of this is actually going down. So kinship placement for our kids, so kids being placed with family networks and things like that, is actually moving downwards. It's not going upwards, which is where we would like to see it. And the majority of our kids in care are being supported by non-Aboriginal organisations or by a government agency that has no true representation of how to keep our Aboriginal kids connected to their community, culture and family. So a lot of our work revolves around Aboriginal children impacted by the child protection and out-of-home care system. So meaning, those children who have been removed from their family for safety reasons. And we argue for supports to strengthen our families, keep kids safe at home where possible, and in the absence of this, that our Aboriginal organisations are empowered to care for our kids. So 38% of children in care are Aboriginal, but in New South Wales, for Aboriginal children under the age of 18, it's only 5% of the total population, which is incredible, and the need for changes now. So within Australia, statutory child protection systems are 10 times more likely to remove an Aboriginal child from their home than a non-Indigenous child. This applies both with respect to New South Wales as well as nationally. So we're on average with the nation in New South Wales. Our kids are overrepresented in every state and territory across the country. In total, there are close to 18,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children in care across the country, with just over about 7,500 in New South Wales. Both the number of Aboriginal kids in care as well as the level of their overrepresentation is increasing over time and trending upwards, likely to hit that 50% mark, if not already there, in some states and territories. And from our perspective, this is due to us being continually marginalised, and our view of what must occur is not accepted or invested in how we see the solutions for our families to strengthen them and return our kids home. And to give it a little bit more of a background and history of how this policy has kind of eventuated over time. The policy of Aboriginal children, of taking Aboriginal children from their families began really soon after colonisation, and many of you would know this, you're aware of Australian history. In New South Wales, a board for the protection of Aboriginal people was established in the mid-19th century, and between about 1910 and 1970s, this policy was formalised as a way of assimilating and even exterminating Aboriginal culture. It was, and arguably continues to be, an act of genocide through the forced transfer of our children to another group with the intent or effect of undermining our distinct cultural existence. So we called this group that were affected by these policies the stolen generations. And many members of the stolen generations were placed in group homes or missions where they experienced significant mistreatment and abuse and caused massive trauma which has been carried through generations. And recent research and evidence has demonstrated the lifelong impacts of these policies, as well as the impacts on descendants. And for many Aboriginal kids in care today, they are descendants of the stolen generations, kind of perpetuating this vicious cycle of intergenerational trauma, requiring a genuine focus on our solutions. So in the 1990s, a federal government inquiry looked into the experiences of the stolen generations members and their families. The inquiry heard from more than 500 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, as well as Aboriginal organisations, foster parents, state and territory governments and others. The report that was released was the Bringing Them Home report, resulting in testimonies and evidence from all those that contributed to the inquiry, as well as 54 recommendations. One of the principles behind the recommendations being self-determination being at the centre of it. And the report recommended the transfer of legal jurisdiction in relation to child welfare matters to Aboriginal communities. And I think what can be said in 21 years' time since the release of this report and numerous other inquiries and reports that have been released in Australia calling for greater self-determination to be handed to Aboriginal communities to deal with Aboriginal child welfare issues and Aboriginal child-related issues. Consistent theme has been the call for self-determination to be provided to Aboriginal communities. In most, if not all, inquiries, that recommendation is ignored by governments. So in looking at the history and the challenges we face, the context that we're coming from, the policies that we need to change and the inherent kind of nature of governments that we have in Australia, for AbSec we start to talk about some of the solutions that need to focus for the future. And so we think about the key is to invest in supporting families rather than removing children. Yet, currently across Australia, less than 1 in every $5 of child protection funding goes to family support early intervention services. So we have a system that's more geared towards removing kids rather than keeping kids at home. We want to see government investment in Aboriginal organisations to develop and deliver our services, our holistic services and responses for our kids and families, support us to support our communities and families to design the services that we need to keep our kids safe and achieve the best possible outcomes. And as I mentioned earlier, culture for us is at the centre of everything that we do as a peak organisation, but also for our Aboriginal organisations across the board. Any solution to the overrepresentation of Aboriginal kids in New South Wales or Australia needs to put culture at the centre. And for us, culture needs to be recognised as a strength and an asset for our children, rather than something standing in their way. Culture informs our kids' identity and helps them find their place in the world as strong Aboriginal people and future leaders. And unfortunately, much of the current conversation by politicians in Australia and in the media is defining or framing our culture as a negative and actually placing our kids in unsafe situations and things like that. This is the kind of arguments that AbSec are having in the public kind of domain to come up against this. And the most recent example is within the federal parliamentary inquiry in Australia at the moment, looking at increasing the amount of adoption of children in out-of-home care, including Aboriginal children, from the statutory system. The question was asked whether cultural considerations in any situation should override the safety of the child. And this question is concerning because it conflates the issue. It isolates the 2 points. And first, you know, we need to think about when we actually talk to other Aboriginal young people, what do they mean by what's safety to them? And culture is always at the heart of that. Connection to their culture and connected to their family and community is critical. And really, when you have a child protection system that's built not by listening to the voices of Aboriginal young people or any young person, what is the system there to serve? And secondly, you can't separate one aspect that is so critical to life and social development in favour of another. So really, safety and culture must be understood together rather than in opposition. And for us as a peak, we have to constantly make this argument that culture is critical for our kids and for our communities to really underpin every kind of government policy or program that is being invested in today. So we know that for us, and one of our key priorities is to support the investment in Aboriginal community-controlled organisations as a means to supporting our children and families across New South Wales. We talk about the idea of creating an Aboriginal safety net for our families and children. This is through our organisations and communities, where there's genuine investment from government to be able to support children to remain at home in the community, but also to keep really the instances of child protection and out-of-home care occurring, so more early intervention and family support type services are occurring. So for us, and really this becomes core to our role, our focus is promoting the positives of our organisations and the outcomes that our organisations achieve for families and children, including how our organisations have the solutions to address the overrepresentation of children in care or in the child protection system. We're constantly arguing against misconceptions or needing to change the misconception that our Aboriginal organisations are inadequate to deliver the best possible outcome for our children and families. So as an organisation, we have quite a big body of work ahead of us, and really things that we've released to date. As an overview of the organisation, we've got two kind of main streams: our support and sustainability area focused on building up our Aboriginal community-controlled sector. So if we have the ground supported and established, delivering for Aboriginal children and families across the whole continuum, so not just in one aspect, but being able to support our families and children as they may need it within the system. So that's led by Dana Hogg. and our strategy, policy and engagement area, which is about saying to government, enable us to enact the frameworks, policies, systems that we know will work for our children and families. And this team is very much focused on how we present those ideas, those policy positions, those papers that will lead us to that point. So we do this through engaging our community, our key stakeholders, being accountable to our communities, our children and young people, families, providing that leadership and vision for the entire system as it relates to Aboriginal children and families, from a cultural connection perspective through to those solutions that we know will work. And strengthening and supporting local community approaches that are aimed at empowering our communities to deliver for families and communities and kids. So I thought rather than go into every bit of thing that we do in terms of the things that we've produced and such, I might talk a little bit about some broad kind of areas that we're focused on at the moment. And obviously for us, the adoption of Aboriginal children from the statutory system is not something that we support, and we oppose it as an Aboriginal peak organisation. So this is one of our priorities at the moment, and particularly as a peak, that we're campaigning against this in the public, raising the public awareness around why adoption of Aboriginal children from the statutory system is one, a repeat of past practices, but also not in the best interest of keeping our kids connected to culture. And we're also framing and driving a positive agenda around the positions that we put out there to enable our Aboriginal safety net for families and children, but also to provide governments the opportunity to just invest in us and the solutions that we know will work. And so that being us establishing a holistic public health model across the continuum from universal through to crisis support, where we're seeing more resources geared towards the universal and tailored in a way that are around being responsive to Aboriginal families in New South Wales. We're also looking at and really looking to New Zealand here and learning from the model over here around an Aboriginal commissioning for outcomes approach, where we can try and influence government in a way and advocate to government that if we were to invest in an approach in New South Wales, how would this be integrated into the New South Wales framework rather than duplicating something that might be there, but how do we actually learn from others to invest in that to address some of the issues that we're coming up against. And as a starting point, the third being the finalisation of Aboriginal case management policy, which really is about shaping the way that our workers on the ground are working with Aboriginal children and families. And that's not just Aboriginal workers, it's non-Aboriginal workers as well. And this is really for us quite a kind of landmark kind of thing, because we haven't seen governments invest in non-government organisations to develop policies for Aboriginal children and families. So this is us developing an Aboriginal case management policy that is specifically for our kids and families that we will soon hopefully see particularly the state government invest in. And there was another little film there, but we might just slip, yep. But then to support all that and to embed what we're actually doing, AbSec realised over the last couple of years that we needed to start looking at how we provide nationally accredited training for our workers out there across the state. And so we established a subsidiary company focused on providing that training, our AbSec Learning and Development Centre. And so they will provide that in turn to bed down what we're doing in supporting Aboriginal children and families, either in the leadership and management space through to the child, youth and family. It's quite exciting for us. Now, look, over the last couple of years, we've released quite a lot of position papers and things like that. Being a non-government organisation, we're generally bound by the government of the day. And the government of the day in New South Wales is a Conservative government who is pushing an agenda of the way to fix a statutory system is by removing the numbers of kids that are counted in that system, and so using adoption approaches and things like that, which has forced us as an organisation to move from one that we want to have a collaborative relationship with government and other partners into one where we have to have a public conversation about this, to raise awareness in the public domain about how we should be given the right to support our kids and families. And that's a challenge that we're still pushing ahead with. But really, it's been a pleasure to be here. It's great that, listening to some of the presentations we've had this morning and some of the things that we can take away as an organisation. We are here for the remainder of the conference and staying on for a couple of days after that to do a couple of visits to some organisations. And really, I think for AbSec to continue working with all of you and learning from all of you will only help us shape the fight that we're on and the challenges that we're up against. And hopefully over time we can actually get to a better sharing relationship about things that we can share together. Thank you.
Chin chin